What would you do if you had only $3 and a heart full of courage? This is the true story of Caleb and Mei Lin, two souls whose unlikely bond defied cruelty, injustice, and changed their destinies forever. If you love stories of hope, courage, and unlikely friendships, hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey. Caleb Hunter stepped off the creaking stagecoach with nothing but a worn-out hat on his head and $3 lonely clutched tightly in his calloused hand. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the dusty streets of Red Rock, a town rougher than the rocks that surrounded it. His boots kicked up clouds of dry dirt as he made his way toward the small general store, hoping to buy enough provisions to last through the bitter winter that was fast approaching. As Caleb wandered past the crowded main square, a commotion caught his attention. A crowd had gathered around a makeshift auction block, their voices rising in heated excitement. Curious, Caleb edged closer, squinting through the late afternoon haze. What he saw made his heart stop. On the auction block stood a fragile figure, a young Chinese girl no older than 8. Her eyes were wide and filled with fear, her tiny hands trembling at her sides. She was being sold like a piece of livestock, her fate determined by the highest bidder. The men calling out prices were rough and cruel, their voices cold and uncaring. Something inside Caleb snapped. He'd seen hardship before, but this was a cruelty beyond measure. Without thinking, he stepped forward and raised his hand, bidding a few dollars higher than the last man. The crowd turned, surprised by the poor rancher's sudden intervention. Whispers spread quickly. Who was this man, daring to challenge the wealthy landowners? But Caleb's mind was made up. When the hammer finally fell, declaring him the new owner of the girl named Mei Lin, a fierce resolve settled in his chest. But there was a problem. Caleb didn't have enough money to pay for her. The $3 in his pocket were barely enough to feed himself, let alone purchase a human being. The murmurs grew louder, some mocking, others angry. Then Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, his face stern but fair. "This auction's a farce," he said quietly, "but the law's the law. I'll cover the difference, Caleb." The sheriff's hand rested briefly on Caleb's shoulder, a silent promise of support. Caleb looked down at Mei Lin, whose frightened eyes now searched his face for reassurance. Taking a deep breath, he reached out, gently lifting her into his arms. The crudely drawn bill of sale was thrust into his hand, a piece of paper that both chained and freed them. As the crowd began to disperse, Caleb whispered softly, "You're safe now, Mei Lin. I swear it." But deep inside, he knew the real fight was only just beginning. Caleb Hunter walked through the uneven wooden sidewalks of Red Rock, Mei Lin nestled carefully in his arms, her small body trembling not only from the chill in the air but from the uncertainty that clung to every corner of the town. The sun had dipped lower, casting long ominous shadows that seemed to whisper warnings with every step they took. His heart tightened as he felt her grip on his shirt loosen, the fragile trust between them still fragile as the brittle leaves skittering along the street. Their first stop was the town's modest general store, its faded sign swinging creakily in the wind. Caleb hoped to find bread and some dried meat to ease Mei Lin's hunger, but as he approached the door, the shopkeeper's cold eyes flicked toward them with thinly veiled disdain. A few townsfolk lingered nearby, their faces etched with suspicion and hostility. Whispers followed them like a dark cloud. "Why is that poor man carrying a Chinese girl? She doesn't belong here. This ain't no place for them." Inside the store, Caleb laid a few coins on the counter and asked gently for what they needed. The shopkeeper's lips curled into a sneer. "We don't serve your kind here," he spat, eyes hardening as he glanced at Mei Lin. The words hit Caleb like a physical blow, the sharp edge of prejudice cutting deeper than any wound. Determined not to show weakness, Caleb nodded stiffly. "We'll find what we need elsewhere." But the rejection echoed in the empty shelves of his hope. Outside, Mei Lin's eyes darted nervously between faces turned away or watching with thinly disguised contempt. She clutched Caleb's shirt tighter, seeking the only comfort she knew. As they moved on, the coldness of the town's people became palpable. At the local diner, the same scene repeated, a curt refusal, a slammed door, and the unmistakable murmur of disapproval. Caleb felt the weight of every stare, the unspoken accusation that they had broken some invisible law by simply existing together. One afternoon, as the wind kicked up dust through the narrow streets, 3 men approached Caleb. Their faces were set in hard lines, their eyes cold and unyielding. They were the town's powerful, men used to control, to decide who belonged and who did not. "You made a mistake buying that girl," the tallest one growled, stepping closer. "You're breaking the rules, Hunter. This town doesn't tolerate this kind of defiance." His voice was low but carried a threat heavier than any gun. Caleb met each of their gazes steadily, feeling the tension coil in his chest like a rattlesnake ready to strike. "She's under my protection now," he said firmly, voice unwavering despite the fear that threatened to rise. "I won't let you take her." The men exchanged glances, amused yet warning. "You're alone in this fight," one sneered. "Think carefully before you make enemies you can't handle." But Caleb's grip tightened on Mei Lin's hand. Despite the cold shoulders and biting words, despite the simmering hatred that surrounded them, he refused to back down. In that moment, with the weight of a hostile town pressing down on them, a quiet fire was lit within both, a fire that would not be easily extinguished. The heavy weight of the town's judgment pressed down on Caleb Hunter like a suffocating shroud. The once dusty streets of Red Rock, where he had hoped to find a simple refuge, now seemed like a cage closing in around him and Mei Lin. Every glance from the townsfolk was a dagger, every whispered word a noose tightening. The air buzzed with hostility, thick and palpable. That evening, under the fading light of a bruised sky, Caleb found himself cornered near the edge of the town square. Three men, the very ones who had warned him days before, approached with slow, deliberate steps. Their eyes burned with cold fury, and their hands hovered near the weapons holstered at their hips. Their leader, a tall man with a scar tracing down his cheek, spoke with a voice low and cruel. "You think you can just buy her and keep her here? You're making enemies of men who don't forget," he warned. "Give her up, Hunter. Walk away while you still can." Caleb's jaw tightened. Mei Lin clung to his coat, her small face pale but resolute. The threats no longer frightened him, not when the girl's very life was at stake. "She's with me," Caleb said firmly, meeting the leader's glare without flinching. "I won't let you take her back to that hell." A tense silence fell. The crowd that had gathered muttered nervously, sensing the brewing storm. Just as the situation threatened to erupt, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "Enough." Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, his badge gleaming faintly in the dusk. His eyes scanned the hostile faces, then rested on Caleb and Mei Lin. "This auction," he declared, "was illegal. The so-called owners had no right to sell Mei Lin. Any attempt to reclaim her is unlawful." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some scowled, others exchanged uncertain glances. But the sheriff's word carried weight. Despite the sheriff's intervention, the atmosphere remained charged with danger. Caleb knew they couldn't stay, not with tempers flaring and threats looming. As night swallowed the last hues of day, he made a decision that would change everything. With Mei Lin tucked carefully under a threadbare blanket, Caleb led a weary horse to an old creaky cart resting behind the stable. The horse snorted softly, sensing the urgency. They loaded what little they had, some dried bread, a flask of water, and a few worn belongings, and set off under a blanket of stars, the cool night air biting at their faces. The narrow trails outside Red Rock twisted and turned through jagged rocks and thick brush. Every creak of the cart wheels, every soft hoofbeat echoed in the stillness, each sound a potential warning. Behind them, Caleb could feel the eyes of pursuers, men hungry to drag Mei Lin back into the shadows. Panic knotted Caleb's stomach, but he pushed it down, focusing on steadying the horse and keeping Mei Lin calm. She nestled against him, whispering stories of distant lands she had never seen, clinging to hope like a fragile flame. The chase was relentless. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, the crunch of hooves growing louder with each mile. Caleb's grip tightened on the reins as he urged the horse onward, pushing it beyond exhaustion. The rocky terrain tested their every step. Once, the cart nearly tipped on a steep incline, but Caleb's quick reflexes saved them. Hours felt like days as they barreled through the wilderness. Exhaustion pulled at Caleb's limbs, but the thought of Mei Lin's safety gave him strength beyond measure. Finally, as dawn's pale light seeped over the horizon, Caleb spotted a narrow gap between two massive boulders, a natural choke point. Heart-pounding, he maneuvered the cart into position, blocking the only way through. He stepped down, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the trees. The pursuers burst from the shadows, weapons raised, their faces twisted with rage. Caleb stood firm, voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "You won't take her," he said, finger poised on the trigger. The moment hung heavy with tension, a fragile breath away from violence. But just when the first shot seemed inevitable, the distant thunder of hooves announced Sheriff Dalton's arrival, followed by deputies armed and resolute. The sheriff's commanding voice boomed across the clearing. "Stand down. This ends now. Any further action will be met with federal charges." The attackers hesitated, their fury tempered by the law's presence. Carter Graves, the leader, snarled in frustration but retreated, dragging his men away into the thickening woods. Caleb lowered his rifle, relief washing over him like rain on parched earth. Mei Lin looked up, eyes shining with a mixture of fear and newfound hope. In that quiet morning light, amidst the wilderness and the fading threat, freedom began to take root. The rocky trail twisted sharply beneath Caleb's worn boots as he urged the exhausted horse forward, the cart creaking ominously behind them. The air was thick with tension, each rattling wheel a stark reminder that their pursuers were closing in fast. Mei Lin huddled close to Caleb, her small hands clutching the rough fabric of his shirt as her wide eyes darted nervously into the gathering shadows. Every rustle in the brush, every distant snap of a twig set her heart racing. Behind them, the sound of pounding hooves grew louder, angry, relentless, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Caleb's breath came in ragged gasps, the weight of the rifle in his hands a cold reassurance amid the chaos. His mind raced, searching for any advantage, any sliver of hope to keep them safe. Suddenly, the narrow path opened to a jagged gorge, the towering rocks on either side like ancient sentinels guarding a forbidden passage. Caleb's pulse quickened as he realized this was their chance. With desperate strength, he steered the horse toward the narrowest point between two massive boulders, the only place where the pursuing men could be slowed, trapped. The horse's hooves scraped against stone as Caleb slammed the brakes on the cart, wedging the wheels firmly against the earth. He jumped down, rifle ready, scanning the dense trees and underbrush where shadows shifted menacingly. The sun dipped low, casting an amber glow that barely pierced the thickening dusk. The pursuers appeared like ghosts through the fading light, faces twisted with fury and desperation. Their leader, Carter Graves, raised his hand, signaling them to fan out, cutting off any escape routes. Guns glinted as they prepared to close in. Caleb's fingers tightened on the rifle's trigger, his voice low but steady. "You won't take her. Not today." The first shots cracked through the air, echoing sharply against the rocks. Caleb fired back with precision born from years on the frontier, each shot a barrier protecting the fragile life at his side. Mei Lin crouched behind the cart, ears covered, trembling but safe. The skirmish raged, shadows dancing in the firelight of gunfire. But just as Caleb felt the pressure mounting, the distant sound of hooves thundered closer, Sheriff Dalton and his deputies bursting through the trees, faces grim and determined. "Enough!" The sheriff's voice rang out, authoritative and commanding. "This ends now. Stand down, or face the consequences." The pursuers hesitated, caught between fury and law. Carter's glare burned, but defeat edged into his expression as the sheriff advanced, deputies fanning out to encircle the attackers. One by one, guns lowered, tension melting into reluctant surrender. Carter spat curses but knew when the fight was lost. With a final glare at Caleb and Mei Lin, he turned and led his men away into the encroaching darkness. Caleb exhaled deeply, lowering his rifle as relief flooded through him. Mei Lin peeked out, eyes bright with awe and gratitude. In that moment, surrounded by rugged cliffs and the quiet presence of justice, freedom finally began to breathe. Months had passed since that harrowing night when freedom had finally broken through the shadows of Red Rock. The land around Caleb Hunter's ranch, once rough and untamed, now blossomed under the steady hands of two determined souls. Mei Lin stood at the edge of the sprawling fields, her sleeves rolled up, skin kissed by the sun's golden glow. The faint scent of earth and growing crops filled the air, mingling with the gentle hum of life awakening from winter's grasp. What had once been a frightened girl, trembling at the cruel indifference of strangers, was now a woman of quiet strength and unwavering resolve. She moved through the fields with grace, her fingers brushing over the tender shoots of wheat, the promise of a harvest reflecting the promise she carried within. Half of the ranch's title, once a mere dream whispered in secret corners, was now hers, a testament to the bond forged in adversity and the courage to claim what was rightfully hers. Caleb watched from the porch of the weathered farmhouse, pride warming his eyes. He saw not just a partner in the hard work of the land, but a true friend whose spirit had become intertwined with his own. Their journey from that dusty auction block to this thriving sanctuary had been long and fraught with hardship, but every struggle had planted seeds of hope that now bloomed in abundance. The townspeople of Red Rock, once suspicious and cold, had begun to shift their gaze, unable to ignore the success born from resilience and unity. Mei Lin's presence on the land was a quiet challenge to the old prejudices, a living proof that strength and honor transcended color and birthright. Together, Caleb and Mei Lin rebuilt more than just a ranch. They rebuilt trust, a future and a legacy. In the evenings, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, they would sit side by side, sharing stories and dreams, knowing that the scars of the past had forged an unbreakable bond. And though the road ahead would still hold its trials, they faced it with heads held high, their spirits undimmed. $3 had sparked a journey that changed two lives forever, a journey that planted the seeds of justice, friendship, and hope in the rugged soil of a once unforgiving land. Caleb and Mei Lin's journey shows us that even the smallest acts of bravery can break chains and build new futures. Their friendship stands as a powerful reminder. Courage and compassion know no boundaries. If their story moved you, remember that every one of us has the power to make a difference. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so you never miss a story that inspires and moves the heart.